The rain fell like needles against Alara's skin, each drop a tiny punishment for daring to believe she could ever be worth something in this world. She ran through the forest without direction, without purpose, knowing only that she needed to get as far away as possible from the pack house where her humiliation had reached its peak just an hour before. Her bare feet slipped on mud and roots, but she kept moving, kept pushing forward even though every part of her screamed to just stop, to just give up, to accept what everyone had always told her she was. Nothing. Less than nothing. A broken Omega who couldn't even shift, who brought shame to her bloodline with every breath she took. The ceremony had been meant to celebrate the choosing of mates among the younger wolves, a tradition held every year when the autumn moon reached its fullest point. Alara had spent weeks preparing herself, gathering the courage to approach Marcus, the beta's son, who had shown her kindness during their training sessions. She had let herself hope, let herself imagine that maybe someone could see past her inability to transform and recognize that she had other qualities, other strengths that made her valuable. That hope had been shattered spectacularly when Marcus laughed in her face in front of the entire gathering, his rejection loud enough for everyone to hear every cruel word. He called her defective, damaged goods that no wolf in his right mind would ever claim. He said her parents should have abandoned her at birth rather than burden the pack with a wolf who wasn't really a wolf at all. The assembled crowd had laughed along with him, their mockery washing over her in waves that felt more suffocating than any physical blow. Even her own father had turned away, unable or unwilling to defend her. And her mother's face had shown nothing but the same disappointment Alara had seen reflected there her entire life. So she ran. The storm had been building all evening, dark clouds rolling in from the mountains with a fury that matched the chaos in her heart. By the time she reached the deep forest, lightning was splitting the sky in jagged white lines, and thunder shook the ground beneath her feet. Part of her welcomed the violence of it, welcomed the idea that nature itself was expressing the rage and sorrow she wasn't allowed to show. Omegas were supposed to be gentle, submissive, accepting of their place in the hierarchy, but there was nothing gentle about what she felt right now, nothing submissive about the scream that tore from her throat as she finally stopped running and collapsed against the trunk of an ancient oak tree. The scream became a sob, then another, then a flood of tears that mixed with the rain streaming down her face. 23 years of being treated as lesser, of being dismissed and degraded, and told she had no value beyond what others decided to grant her. 23 years of trying so hard to prove herself worthy, to show that even without a wolf form she could contribute, could belong. All of it worthless, all of it meaningless. She was exactly what they said she was, a mistake of nature that should never have been born. Lightning struck a tree less than 50 feet away, and Alara didn't even flinch. Let it strike her too. Let the storm take her and end this pathetic existence that brought joy to no one, and pain to everyone forced to acknowledge her presence. She closed her eyes and tilted her face up toward the sky, letting the rain wash over her, letting it drown out the sound of her own crying. Another bolt of lightning, closer this time, illuminating the forest in stark white light that burned through her closed eyelids. She didn't know when she started to notice the pattern. The lightning was striking in rhythm with her sobs, each crack of thunder perfectly timed with each fresh wave of grief that crashed through her chest. When she cried harder, the storm intensified. When she tried to catch her breath, the rain would slow just slightly before picking up again as her emotions spiraled once more. It should have been impossible. It should have been coincidence. But some deep instinct that had been sleeping her entire life began to wake up, began to whisper that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't random at all. Alara opened her eyes and looked up at the roiling clouds above. She thought about Marcus's face twisted in cruel amusement, about her mother's disappointed sigh, about every single person who had ever made her feel worthless. Rage bloomed hot and fierce in her chest, and at that exact moment, 3 bolts of lightning struck simultaneously in a perfect triangle around where she stood, so close that she could feel the hair on her arms stand up from the electrical charge in the air. Her breath caught. She focused on that anger, on that white-hot fury, that she had spent her entire life suppressing because Omegas weren't supposed to feel such things. The sky responded with a rolling boom of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. She raised one trembling hand toward the clouds and thought about calling the lightning down, about commanding it the way alphas commanded their subordinates, and before the thought had fully formed, a bolt of pure electrical energy shot from the clouds directly to her outstretched fingers. It should have killed her. It should have burned her to ash and left nothing but a charred skeleton beneath this tree. Instead, the lightning danced across, her palm like a living thing, crackling and sparking but causing no pain, no damage, just a sensation of pure power that made every nerve in her body sing with awareness. Alara stared at her hand in shock, watching the electricity jump between her fingers, and for the first time in her life she felt something other than shame about what she was. She felt powerful. The sound of footsteps approaching through the storm should have alarmed her, but she was too mesmerized by the lightning still, playing across her skin to care who might be witnessing this moment. Let them see. Let them tell the pack that the defective Omega had finally lost her mind completely and was standing in a lightning storm pretending to control the weather. It couldn't make her situation any worse than it already was, but the scent that reached her nose on the next gust of wind was unlike anything she had encountered before. It was pure alpha, so concentrated and powerful that her knees actually weakened. But there was something else beneath it, something ancient and wild that called to that newly awakened part of her soul. She turned slowly, the lightning still dancing around her hand, and found herself looking at a man who could only be described as devastating in his presence. He stood at the edge of the clearing, completely unbothered by the rain soaking through his dark clothes, watching her with eyes that gleamed silver in the flashes of lightning. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with black hair that fell across his forehead in wet strands, and the raw power emanating from him made it clear he wasn't just any alpha. This was someone who commanded not just a pack, but multiple packs. Someone whose authority was absolute and unquestioned. Kyle had been traveling through this territory on his way to a summit with the northern packs when he felt it, the pulse of elemental power that hadn't been sensed in the supernatural world for over 2 centuries, a signature so distinctive that there could be no mistake about what it meant. The Tempest bloodline was supposed to be extinct, wiped out in the purges that had reshaped wolf society decades before he was born. The Tempest wolves had been too powerful, too dangerous to the established order, and so they had been systematically eliminated until not even their name was spoken anymore except in whispered legends. But standing before him now was living proof that at least one had survived, hidden away in some remote pack where no one had thought to look. She was small and drenched and shaking, with mud streaked across her clothes and tears still wet on her cheeks, and she was casually holding lightning in her palm, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Kyle had seen many things in his 35 years as Alpha King, but this was something entirely new. He took a step closer and watched her tense, watched her eyes dart toward the trees as if calculating whether she could run. The lightning in her hand flared brighter, and he raised both hands in a gesture of peace, keeping his voice low and calm, despite the thunder crashing around them. He told her he meant no harm, that he was only here because he had sensed her power from miles away and needed to understand what he was witnessing. He asked her name and saw surprise flicker across her face, as if she hadn't expected him to care about something so basic as what she was called. Ilara studied the stranger with a confusion that cut through even her emotional turmoil. No one had ever looked at her the way he was looking at her now, with something that resembled fascination rather than disgust, with interest rather than dismissal. She let the lightning fade from her hand, let it dissipate back into the storm clouds above, and wrapped her arms around herself against the cold that suddenly seemed much more noticeable. She told him her name in a voice that came out smaller than she intended, and waited for the inevitable questions about what pack she belonged to, what her rank was, why she was out here alone in the middle of a dangerous storm. Those questions came, but not in the way she expected. Kale asked which pack had been hiding her, which alpha had been fool enough not to recognize what she was, and the genuine anger in his voice when he spoke made Alara blink in surprise. She explained haltingly that no one had been hiding her, that she belonged to the Silver Pine Pack just a few miles from here, that until tonight she had believed herself to be nothing more than a defective Omega who couldn't shift. The words felt strange on her tongue now, after what she had just experienced, after discovering that maybe the weakness everyone saw in her was actually something else entirely. Understanding dawned on Cale's face, and with it came a fury that made the air around him shimmer with barely contained power. He knew what had happened here, knew the signs of a bloodline being suppressed through ignorance or deliberate action. The Tempest Wolves hadn't just been killed in the purges. They had been hidden, their abilities bound by ancient magic, and passed off as disabilities so that no one would recognize them for what they truly were. This girl, this Omega who had spent her entire life being told she was broken, was actually carrying one of the most powerful bloodlines ever to exist among their kind. He asked her if anyone in her family had ever shown unusual abilities, if there were any stories about ancestors who could do things that normal wolves couldn't. Alara thought about it, reaching back through memories she had tried to forget, because they only brought pain. There had been a grandmother she barely remembered, her father's mother who had died when Alara was very young. The old woman had been kept isolated in a cottage at the edge of Packlands, and Alara's father had forbidden anyone from visiting her, claiming she was mad and dangerous. But Alara had snuck over there once when she was 6 or 7, drawn by childish curiosity, and she remembered the way the old woman had looked at her with recognition and sadness. Her grandmother had taken her hand and told her that she carried the storm in her blood, that one day she would understand what that meant. Ilara's father had found her there and dragged her away, and her grandmother had died less than a week later. No one had attended the funeral. No one had spoken her name again. Ilara had buried the memory deep because it hurt to think about, because it was just one more way she didn't fit into the life her family wanted her to have. Cale listened to this with his jaw clenched tight, and Alara could see him making connections she didn't fully understand. He told her that her grandmother had likely been Tempest-born, that the madness her father claimed was probably the result of having her powers bound against her will. He explained about the purges, about the systematic elimination of her bloodline, because the other alphas had feared what the Tempest Wolves could become. He described abilities that sounded like myths and fairy tales, control over weather and storms, lightning that answered to their call, electrical energy that could be shaped and wielded like a weapon. Everything he said resonated with something deep inside Alara, explaining sensations and impulses she had experienced her whole life but never understood. The way she had always felt most calm during thunderstorms while others sought shelter. The way her emotions seemed to affect the weather around her in subtle ways she had convinced herself were coincidence. The strange tingling in her fingertips whenever she felt strong emotion that she had thought was just anxiety or panic. She asked him what this meant, what she was supposed to do with this information. Her voice shook when she pointed out that even if everything he said was true, she was still just one Omega against an entire pack that had made it clear she wasn't wanted. Even if she had power, even if she came from this legendary bloodline, that didn't change the fact that she had nowhere to go, and no one who cared whether she lived or died. The look Cale gave her then was intense enough to make her breath catch. He told her she was wrong on multiple counts. First, she wasn't just an Omega, she was a Tempest heir, which made her royalty among wolves whether anyone recognized it or not. Second, she wasn't alone anymore, because he was extending his personal protection to her, and anyone who wanted to harm her would have to go through the Alpha King to do it. Third, she absolutely had somewhere to go, because he was taking her back to the royal territory where she could be properly trained to use her abilities without fear of persecution or suppression. Alara stared at him as if he had spoken a foreign language. The idea that someone like him, someone with power and authority and respect, would offer her anything beyond contempt was so alien to her worldview that she couldn't quite process it. She asked him why he would do this, what he wanted from her in return, because in her experience no one ever gave anything without expecting payment. The question seemed to offend him, and she watched his expression shift from anger at her pack to something that looked almost like hurt that she would assume such mercenary motives. He crouched down so they were at eye level despite the mud and rain, and he told her the truth in a voice that left no room for doubt. The Tempest bloodline was thought to be extinct, and its return changed everything about the political landscape of their world. There were old alliances that had been built on the assumption that certain powers no longer existed, old treaties that would need to be renegotiated, old enemies who would see her as a threat to be eliminated. Beyond that, the Tempest Wolves had been known for their ability to sense truth and lies, to read intentions through the electrical impulses in living beings, which made them invaluable allies and dangerous opponents. If word got out that one still lived before she was trained and protected, she would be dead within a week. His reasons for helping her were strategic, yes, but they were also personal. Chaol had spent his entire reign trying to undo the damage caused by previous Alpha Kings, who had ruled through fear and elimination of anyone they perceived as competition. The purges that had destroyed her bloodline were a stain on their history that he had worked to make right, offering amnesty and reparations to the families of other persecuted lines. Finding her alive gave him a chance to correct one more historical injustice, and beyond that, he had no tolerance for the kind of abuse she had clearly suffered at the hands of wolves who should have protected her. Elara searched his face for any sign of deception and found none. His scent was completely sincere, carrying none of the sour notes that accompanied lies or manipulation. She realized with a start that she could sense more than just his honesty. She could feel the steady pulse of his emotions, read the electrical signals that his nervous system generated with each thought and feeling. Concern for her safety, anger at her mistreatment, determination to see this through, and underneath it all, a bone-deep loneliness that matched her own so perfectly, it made her chest ache. Before she could overthink it, before fear and self-doubt could talk her out of it, Elara nodded her acceptance. She told him she would go with him, would learn whatever he thought she needed to know, would take this chance he was offering even though part of her still believed this had to be some kind of cruel joke. Chaol's relief was palpable, and he stood, offering her his hand to help her up from where she was still huddled against the tree. The moment their skin made contact, electricity arced between them so powerfully that they both gasped. It wasn't painful, but it was intense, a connection that went deeper than simple physical touch. Elara could feel his wolf recognizing something in her that had nothing to do with her lack of transformation and everything to do with her essential nature. This was what a mate bond felt like, she realized with shock. This overwhelming sense of rightness and belonging that she had heard described but never experienced. Chaol's eyes had darkened to pure silver, and she knew he felt it too, knew he was experiencing the same. Recognition that was coursing through her. But to his credit, he didn't mention it, didn't push or demand or expect anything. He simply held her hand steady until she was standing on her own feet, then released her carefully, as if she were something precious that might break. He removed his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, offering protection from the rain that was finally starting to ease. They walked through the forest together in silence, the storm dissipating around them as Elara's emotions settled into something more manageable than the raw despair that had called it forth. She should have been terrified about leaving everything she knew behind. But the truth was, there was nothing in Silverpine Pack worth staying for. No relationships that would mourn her absence. No possessions she cared about recovering. No future waiting for her beyond more of the same humiliation and rejection she had endured her entire life. Chaol led her to where he had left his vehicle, parked on a service road that bordered the Pack territory. The SUV was sleek and expensive-looking, exactly what she would expect from an Alpha King, and she hesitated before climbing into the passenger seat. This was really happening. She was really leaving with a man she had just met, trusting him to keep promises he had no real obligation to honor. But the alternative was going back to her family's house and pretending tonight had never happened, suppressing these new abilities she had. Discovered and returning to a life that had proven beyond doubt, it had no place for her. The drive to royal territory took several hours, and Elara spent most of it staring out the window, watching the landscape change from the dense forests of her homeland to more open terrain dotted with established Pack settlements. Chaol explained as they drove that the royal seat was actually a small city rather than a single Pack. home to thousands of wolves from various bloodlines who had chosen to live under his direct protection and governance. He had advisors from different factions, councils that helped make decisions affecting all the packs under his authority, and a standing army that maintained peace and enforced the laws he had established. It sounded overwhelming and impossibly complicated to Alara's ears. She had grown up in a pack of maybe 300 wolves total, where everyone knew everyone, and the hierarchy was simple and brutally enforced. The idea of thousands of wolves coexisting, of governance structures and councils and laws that applied equally to all ranks, seemed almost utopian in its scope. She asked him how he managed it, how he kept that many dominant personalities from tearing each other apart in power struggles. Kale smiled slightly at the question and told her it wasn't easy, that he spent most of his time mediating disputes and reminding various hotheads that cooperation served everyone better than constant conflict. But the key was having systems in place that didn't rely on his personal intervention for every decision, and having advisors he trusted to handle matters within their areas of expertise. He had learned early in his reign that trying to control everything directly was a recipe for burnout and failure, so instead, he had built a structure that could function even in his absence. The conversation helped distract Alara from her nervousness, and by the time they reached the outskirts of the royal city, she felt slightly less like she was about to vibrate out of her own skin from anxiety. The city itself was beautiful in a way that made her breath catch. Buildings of stone and wood arranged in elegant patterns, streets lit by lamps that glowed with what looked like captured moonlight, wolves in both skin and fur moving freely through public spaces without the rigid separation by rank she was used to seeing. Kyle's residence was located at the heart of the city, a sprawling estate that managed to feel both imposing and welcoming. He pulled into a private garage and led her through a side entrance, explaining that he wanted to get her settled before word spread about her arrival. There would be questions eventually, curiosity about who she was and why the Alpha King had brought her here personally. But tonight she deserved rest and recovery before facing the inevitable scrutiny. He showed her to a suite of rooms that was larger than her entire family's house back in Silverpine. There was a bedroom with a bed that looked impossibly soft, a bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in, and a sitting area with comfortable furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private garden. Alara stood in the middle of it all feeling completely out of place, like a muddy intruder tracking dirt across spaces meant for people far more important than her. Kale must have sensed her discomfort, because his voice was gentle when he told her these rooms were hers for as long as she wanted them, that no one would enter without her permission, and that she should feel free to use anything she needed. He pointed out where she would find clothes in her size, already prepared by staff who apparently kept such things ready for unexpected guests, and let her know that food would be brought up shortly in case she was hungry. She waited for the catch, for the moment when he would explain what he expected in return for all this generosity. But Kyle simply told her to rest, to take time to process everything that had happened tonight, and that they would talk more in the morning about beginning her training. He moved toward the door, and Alara heard herself call out to stop him, the words leaving her mouth before she could think better of them. She asked him about what had happened in the forest, about the connection they had both felt when they touched. She needed to know if she had imagined it, if her desperate need for acceptance had made her read something into a simple gesture that wasn't really there. Kale paused with his hand on the door handle, and she watched tension ripple across his shoulders. For a long moment he didn't turn around, and she thought maybe he was going to pretend he didn't know what she was talking about. But when he did turn, the expression on his face was raw and honest. He confirmed what she already knew in her heart, that she was his mate, his fated one, the person his wolf recognized as the other half of his soul. He also told her that the bond changed nothing, about her autonomy or her choices, that being mates didn't obligate her to anything she didn't freely choose. She had been through trauma tonight, and was vulnerable in ways that made any discussion of a mate bond inappropriate at best, and predatory at worst. What he wanted, what he hoped for, was the chance to earn her trust over time, to show her through his actions that he was someone worthy of the gift fate had offered him, if she never felt comfortable taking their relationship beyond friendship and alliance. He would respect that choice no matter how much it might hurt. The bond was real, but it didn't override her free will, and he would rather spend his life alone than force any kind of relationship on someone who didn't want it. The carefully controlled emotion in his voice made something crack open in Alara's chest. She had spent her entire life being told she had no value, that no one would ever want her, that she should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention anyone was willing to throw her way. And here was the most powerful alpha in their world telling her that she had a choice, that her wants and needs and comfort mattered more than his own desires. She didn't have words adequate to respond to that, so she simply nodded her understanding and watched him leave, pulling the door closed quietly behind him. Alone for the first time since the storm, Alara let herself sink down onto the edge of that impossibly soft bed and tried to make sense of the fact that her entire life had completely transformed in the space of a few hours. The next morning brought a soft knock on her door, and a cheerful young woman named Maya, who introduced herself as Kale's assistant and Alara's designated guide to royal territory life. Maya had warm brown skin and an infectious smile, and she seemed completely unfazed by Alara's uncertain responses to her friendly chatter. She helped Alara pick out clothes from the extensive wardrobe, explaining that Kale had sent her measurements ahead and had everything prepared while they were driving last night. Over breakfast in a sunny dining room, Maya explained the basic schedule they had worked out for Alara's training. Mornings would be dedicated to physical conditioning and combat training with Kale's head of security, a formidable female alpha named Vera, who apparently didn't believe in going easy on anyone. Afternoons would focus on developing Alara's elemental abilities under Kale's personal instruction, since he had the most knowledge about historical Tempest techniques. Evenings would include lessons on pack politics, supernatural law, and other subjects meant to help her navigate the complex world she had been thrust into. It sounded exhausting and overwhelming, but also purposeful in a way nothing in Alara's life had ever been before. She asked Maya if this was standard for people who came under the Alpha King's protection, and saw something flicker across the other woman's face. Maya admitted, carefully, that no. This level of personal involvement from Kale was extremely unusual, that he typically delegated training and integration to his staff. The fact that he was planning to handle Alara's afternoon sessions himself had already sparked considerable gossip among those who worked closely with him. Alara absorbed this information and wasn't sure what to do with it. Part of her wanted to believe that maybe the mate bond was influencing his behavior, making him more invested in her success than he would normally be. But another part, the part that had been beaten down by years of dismissal and rejection, whispered that he probably just wanted to keep close watch on someone with potentially dangerous abilities. The combat training with Vera proved to be every bit as intense as Maya had warned. The security chief was built like a brick wall, all muscle and controlled aggression, and she made it clear from the start that she expected Alara to push herself beyond what felt comfortable or possible. They started with basic conditioning, running laps around an indoor track until Alara's lungs burned and her legs felt like they might give out. Then came strength training, flexibility work, and the beginning stages of hand-to-hand combat techniques. Vera's teaching style was blunt and direct, but not unkind. She corrected Alara's form without making her feel stupid, pushed her harder when she started to flag without making her feel inadequate. By the time the morning session ended, Alara was drenched in sweat and trembling with exhaustion, but also feeling stronger than she ever had before. There was something deeply satisfying about learning what her body could do when properly trained, about discovering capabilities she hadn't known existed. Lunch was a quiet affair in her rooms, where she could barely keep her eyes open long enough to eat. Maya had left information about Tempest wolves for her to read during the midday break, historical accounts and legends that painted a picture of her bloodline's former glory. Alara learned that Tempest wolves had served as arbiters of truth, using their ability to sense electrical impulses to determine when someone was lying. They had been advisors to kings, judges in disputes, and ultimately targets when those in power decided that having someone who could always detect deception was too dangerous to tolerate. The purges had been systematic and brutal. Whole families wiped out overnight, their homes burned, their names erased from pack records. The few who survived had gone into hiding, suppressing their abilities through ancient binding magic that was passed down through generations. Her grandmother must have carried such a binding, and likely her father had too, though his Tempest blood had been diluted enough that it manifested only as minor quirks rather than full abilities. In Elara, the bloodline had concentrated again, skipping a generation to emerge in its full power. The binding that had been placed on her as an infant, probably by her own family trying to protect her through ignorance, had prevented her shift, but hadn't been able to fully contain her elemental gifts. The storm had broken through those bindings like they were paper, and now there was no going back to what she had been before. Cale found her asleep in the sitting room with a book about Tempest history open across her lap. He paused in the doorway watching her sleep, taking in the exhaustion that lined her face, even in rest, and felt the mate bond pulse with the overwhelming need to protect her from anything that might cause her pain. It was going to be difficult maintaining appropriate distance when every instinct he had screamed at him to claim her, to mark her as his, and make it clear to every wolf in existence that she was under his protection. But he had meant what he said last night. Elara deserved the chance to choose her own path, to build her strength and confidence without the added pressure of navigating a mate bond she hadn't asked for. The fact that she was his mate was secondary to ensuring she got the support and training she needed to survive in a world that would see her as either a threat or a tool to be used. He cleared his throat softly and watched her wake with a start, confusion crossing her face before memory caught up with current reality. She apologized for falling asleep, and he waved off the concern, telling her that Vera's training would do that to anyone not accustomed to it. He asked if she felt ready for their afternoon session, or if she needed more time to recover. Elara considered her aching muscles and exhausted mind, then thought about the lightning she had called from the sky, about the power humming just beneath her skin, waiting to be properly understood and controlled. She told him she was ready, and watched satisfaction flash across his face, before he schooled his expression back to professional calm. They worked in a specialized training room deep beneath the main residence, a space reinforced with materials that could withstand significant magical and elemental assault. Kyle explained that before they could focus on combat applications, Elara needed to develop basic control over her abilities. Right now, her power responded primarily to emotion, which made it unpredictable and potentially dangerous to herself and others. The goal was to teach her to call it forth at will, to shape and direct it with intention, rather than letting it explode outward in uncontrolled bursts. He demonstrated with his own alpha power, showing her how he could summon and dismiss it, could direct it in focused beams, or let it radiate outward in a general field. The control was impressive, and Elara felt inadequate watching it, knowing that her own abilities were still so raw and untrained. Kyle must have sensed her doubt, because he reminded her that he had been practicing for over 3 decades, while she had only discovered her power existed less than 24 hours ago. They started simply, with Cale asking her to call small sparks to her fingertips. It took tremendous concentration to access that well of power, without flooding herself with the emotions that had originally triggered it. She had to find a balance between detachment and connection, had to learn to touch the lightning within her without letting it consume her. Hours passed in painstaking practice, small successes followed by frustrating failures, but gradually she began to understand the feel of it, the particular internal muscles she needed to flex to bring forth electricity without bringing forth the storm. Cale was a patient teacher, never showing frustration with her slow progress, always finding something to praise even in her failures. He explained that Tempest wolves historically trained from childhood, building their control gradually over years of practice. The fact that she was managing even basic manipulation after a single afternoon was actually remarkable, though it didn't feel that way to her when she kept accidentally shocking herself. By the time they finished for the day, Elara could reliably summon sparks and maintain a small field of electrical energy around her hands. It wasn't much compared to what she had done in the forest, but it was progress she had achieved through skill rather than emotional outburst. Cale seemed genuinely pleased with her advancement and told her so, the approval in his voice making something warm bloom in her chest. The evening lessons were less physically demanding, but no less challenging. An elderly wolf named Marcus, who served as Cale's chief political advisor, walked her through the complex network of pack alliances, territorial agreements, and ancient feuds that shaped supernatural politics. There were old grudges dating back centuries, carefully balanced power dynamics that could collapse into war with a single misstep, and dozens of ambitious alphas who would love nothing more than to find a weakness in Kael's rule they could exploit. Marcus explained that news of her existence would spread quickly once it became public knowledge, and she needed to be prepared for the political fallout. There would be those who saw her as a threat to be eliminated, carrying as she did the bloodline that had once rivaled even the royal wolves in power. There would be others who would seek to use her, wanting access to a Tempest Wolf's truth, sensing abilities for their own purposes. And there would be those who simply feared her, remembering the old stories about what her ancestors could do. The only protection that mattered in their world was strength, and she needed to become strong enough that attacking her would be more costly than leaving her alone. That strength would come partly from her own abilities once fully trained, and partly from Kael's willingness to declare war on anyone who tried to harm her. Marcus looked at her seriously when he said that last part, making sure she understood the weight of what the Alpha King was offering. Elara asked why Kael would risk so much for someone he barely knew, why he would threaten war on behalf of an Omega from a minor pack who had nothing to offer in return. Marcus studied her for a long moment, before asking if she truly believed she had nothing to offer, or if perhaps she had simply been taught to devalue herself to the point where she couldn't recognize her own worth. The observation hit harder than any physical blow. Vera had landed during combat training. The days settled into a demanding but purposeful rhythm. Mornings with Vera building physical strength and combat skills. Afternoons with Kael developing her elemental abilities and learning about Tempest history. Evenings with various advisors covering everything from politics to economics to supernatural law. The training was relentless and exhausting, but also exactly what she needed, giving her both practical skills and confidence in her ability to learn and grow. Her power developed steadily under Kael's guidance. Within a week, she could call lightning consistently, could shape it into different forms and direct it with reasonable accuracy. Within 2 weeks, she was learning to sense the electrical impulses in living things, reading emotions and intentions through the bioelectric signals every living being generated. The truth-sensing ability that had made her ancestors so valuable was beginning to manifest, letting her know with certainty when someone was being dishonest or hiding their real feelings. It was during one of these training sessions that Elara accidentally read Kael more deeply than she intended, her power surging stronger than expected and connecting her directly to his nervous system. She felt everything he was feeling in that moment, the pride in her progress, the constant awareness of the mate bond humming between them, the iron control he maintained over his desire to close the distance between them. She felt his loneliness too, the weight of leadership that kept him isolated, even in a city full of wolves, the careful walls he maintained to protect himself from those who might try to use emotional connection as a weapon. She pulled back immediately, horrified at the invasion of privacy, but the damage was done. Kael knew what had happened, could see in her face that she had glimpsed things he kept carefully hidden from everyone. For a moment they just stared at each other, the air between them crackling with more than just electrical energy. Kael spoke first, his voice rough with emotion he wasn't quite managing to suppress. He told her that what she had felt was real, that he didn't regret her seeing it even though he hadn't intended to share so much so soon. The mate bond made him want things he had no right to ask for, made him hope for a future that might never come to pass. But those wants and hopes were his responsibility to manage, not hers to feel obligated to fulfill. Elara found herself moving closer before she consciously decided to do so, drawn by the vulnerability he was showing her. She told him she was sorry for invading his privacy, but she wasn't sorry for what she had learned. For so long she had believed she was unworthy of care or affection, that her existence was a burden others had to tolerate. But feeling his genuine concern for her well-being, his pride in her accomplishments, his hope that maybe someday she might feel for him even a fraction of what he felt for her, it had shifted something fundamental in how she saw herself. She wasn't ready for everything the mate bond implied, wasn't prepared to navigate the complexities of a romantic relationship when she was still figuring out who she was outside the oppression she had escaped. But she wanted him to know that she was grateful, that his patience and respect meant more to her than he could possibly understand, and that maybe, when she was stronger and more certain of herself, there could be space to explore what this connection between them might become. The relief that crossed Cale's face was profound and touching. He reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and when she didn't, he took her hand in his. The electricity that sparked between them was controlled now, a pleasant tingle rather than a shocking surge. And they stood like that for a long moment, just feeling the connection without needing words to define it. Their peace was shattered 2 weeks. Later, when a delegation from Silverpine Pack arrived requesting an audience with the Alpha King, Maya came to find Alara during her morning training to let her know, concern clear on her face. The delegation was led by Alara's father and was demanding that she be returned to them immediately, claiming Cale had no right to take a pack member without proper procedure and negotiation. The notification sent ice through Alara's veins. She had known this moment would come eventually, had known her disappearance wouldn't go unremarked forever, but she had hoped for more time, more training, more strength before she had to face the family that had made her life a living hell. Vera put a hand on her shoulder and reminded her that she didn't have to see them if she didn't want to, that Cale would handle the delegation regardless of her involvement. But Alara realized she did want to see them, wanted to face them as the person she was becoming rather than the broken Omega they had dismissed. She asked Vera to take her to wherever the meeting was being held, ignoring the other woman's concerned expression. If she was going to be strong, if she was going to survive in this world, she couldn't hide from difficult confrontations just because they scared her. The formal receiving hall was impressive enough to make anyone feel small, with its vaulted ceilings and elegant architecture designed to remind visitors of exactly how powerful the Alpha King was. Kyle sat on a raised platform at the far end, every inch the dangerous predator, despite his relaxed posture. His advisors flanked him, including Marcus, and several others Alara had come to know through her evening lessons. The Silverpine delegation stood in the center of the room, looking decidedly uncomfortable under the weight of so much focused alpha power. Alara's father was there along with Marcus, the Beta's son who had rejected her so publicly, and several other high-ranking pack members. They all turned when she entered, through a side door, and she watched shock ripple across their faces as they took in her transformation. She stood straighter now, carried herself with confidence born from weeks of Vera's brutal training. She wore clothes befitting someone under royal protection rather than the cast-offs she had grown up with. Most importantly, electricity danced visibly across her fingertips, a clear display of power that none of them could possibly miss. Her father found his voice first, demanding to know what Cale had done to her, what kind of magic he had used to give her these unnatural abilities. There was fear in his scent beneath the bluster, and Alara understood with sudden clarity that he had always known what she was, had always known about her Tempest blood. He had bound her abilities as an infant, hoping to hide her from the same forces that had killed his mother. But his solution had been to suppress rather than protect, to make her vulnerable and helpless rather than teaching her to survive. Cale's voice cut across the hall with the kind of authority that made everyone present straighten involuntarily. He told them that he had done nothing to Alara, except provide the training and support she should have received from her own pack. Her abilities were her birthright, awakened naturally when the suppression bindings broke under stress. If Silverpine had treated her with even basic dignity, if they had investigated why she couldn't shift rather than just labeling her defective, they might have discovered the truth themselves. Alara's father tried to argue, claiming they had only been trying to keep her safe, that if anyone had discovered what she was, she would have been killed like the rest of the Tempest line. Cale's laugh was sharp and humorless. He pointed out that their version of keeping her safe had involved years of abuse and neglect, had left her believing she was worthless and broken, had culminated in such severe emotional trauma that she had run into a lethal storm, preferring death to returning home. That wasn't protection. That was torture through ignorance and cowardice. Marcus stepped forward then, his expression ugly with resentment. He declared that regardless of what powers she might have developed, Alara was still bound to Silverpine Pack by birth and by law. She had no right to run away, and no right to claim protection from another alpha without proper release from her home pack. His eyes slid to Alara with the kind of speculative greed that made her skin crawl. and she realized with disgust that he was recalculating her value now that she had proven to be something other than worthless. Before Kale could respond, Ilara found herself stepping forward, her voice clear and steady, despite the fear making her heart race. She told Marcus that he had made his position on her value abundantly clear the night of the choosing ceremony. He had called her defective, damaged, a burden no wolf in his right mind would claim. She had witnesses to his public rejection, witnesses to years of mistreatment by him and others in Silverpine Pack, by the laws governing their kind. Sustained abuse and public rejection constituted grounds for requesting transfer to another pack. Marcus tried to interrupt, but Ilara continued, letting electricity crackle more visibly around her hands. She pointed out that even if he was willing to ignore his own words and actions, she was invoking her right as a Tempest heir to claim sanctuary under royal protection. Her bloodline predated Silverpine Pack by centuries and carried status that superseded local pack hierarchy. She didn't need their permission to leave, and she certainly didn't need their approval of where she went. The legal maneuvering was something Marcus had taught her during their evening sessions, preparing her for exactly this kind of confrontation. She watched her father's face darken with fury, and Marcus's expression cycle through anger and frustration before landing on calculation. He asked sweetly if she really believed the Alpha King would maintain his protection once the novelty of her abilities wore off, if she understood that she was just a temporary curiosity who would be discarded the moment someone more useful came along. Kale stood then, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees from the cold rage radiating off him. He told Marcus in a voice that promised violence that he was going to say this once and only once. Ilara was under his permanent protection as both a Tempest heir and as his acknowledged mate. Anyone who threatened her, harmed her, or even spoke to her with disrespect would answer to him directly, and he did not make idle threats. Silverpine Pack could accept this reality gracefully, or they could test his resolve and learn exactly why he had held the position of Alpha King for over a decade, despite numerous challenges to his rule. The word mate sent shockwaves through the Silverpine delegation and through Ilara herself. She hadn't expected Kale to publicly acknowledge the bond, hadn't thought he would use it as a political weapon on her behalf, but she could see the strategic brilliance of it even as her heart raced. No pack would dare move against the Alpha King's mate, no matter what abilities she did or didn't possess. By claiming her publicly, Kale had made her untouchable. Her father looked between them with an expression Ilara couldn't quite read. Finally, he asked quietly if this was what she wanted, if she was choosing this life over her family and the pack she had been born into. There was no warmth in the question, but there was also resignation, an acceptance that this battle was already lost. Ilara met his eyes steadily and told him that Silverpine had never been her family, not in any way that mattered. A family protected and nurtured, didn't suppress and abuse. She was choosing herself, choosing the chance to become strong and capable, choosing a future that held possibilities, beyond endless suffering. If he had ever cared about her as a daughter, rather than just a shameful secret, he would understand and support that choice. Something flickered across her father's face that might have been regret or might have been relief. He inclined his head in acknowledgement and told Kyle that Silverpine Pack would not contest Ilara's transfer or her claim of sanctuary. They would update their records to reflect her departure and would spread word among allied packs that she was under royal protection. The delegation left shortly after, Marcus's furious glare promising that he personally might not be done with this situation, even if his pack officially was. When they were gone, Ilara felt her knees go weak and had to grab onto a nearby pillar for support. Kyle was beside her instantly, steadying her with gentle hands, asking if she was all right. She told him she was, that she just needed a moment to process what had happened. She asked him why he had claimed her publicly, as his mate, when they had agreed to take things slowly, when she hadn't given him permission to use the bond that way. Kyle's expression was serious when he explained that he had considered multiple approaches, but ultimately decided that making the bond public knowledge was the best protection he could offer her. As an unmated Tempest heir, she would be seen as available, as someone who could be pursued or bargained for by ambitious alphas looking to strengthen their bloodlines. As his mate, She became politically off-limits in ways that simple royal protection couldn't fully achieve. He apologized if the public declaration had made her uncomfortable, but he didn't regret the strategic value it provided. Ilara absorbed this and realized he was right, that she had been thinking about the mate bond only in personal terms, without considering the political implications. Being claimed by the Alpha King changed her status in ways that went beyond simple protection. She thanked him for thinking ahead, for using every tool available to keep her safe, even if it meant exposing something private to public scrutiny. The announcement of their mate bond sent ripples through supernatural society exactly as Kale had anticipated. Some alphas sent congratulations and gifts, attempting to curry favor with the newly elevated Tempest heir. Others sent veiled threats or demands for audiences, trying to feel out whether this changed existing political arrangements. A few simply went silent, retreating to their territories to reassess their plans in light of this new development. Through it all, Ilara's training continued and intensified. Vera pushed her harder now that her presence was public knowledge, explaining that she needed to be able to defend herself against anyone who might test her, despite Kale's warnings. The combat training expanded to include defense against magical and elemental attacks, scenarios where she would need to use her lightning offensively, tactics for fighting multiple opponents at once. Her sessions with Kale took on new urgency as well. They worked on long-distance lightning strikes, on calling storms, on reading the electrical impulses in groups of people to detect threats before they materialized. She learned to sense lies and deception with increasing accuracy, to know when someone harbored ill intent, even if they hid it behind friendly words. The political education Marcus provided focused more now on recognizing manipulation and navigating the treacherous waters of supernatural diplomacy. 6 weeks after the confrontation with Silverpine Pack, Ilara was training alone in the reinforced practice room when she felt it. A disturbance in the electrical fields around the royal estate, multiple sources of hostile intent converging on their location from different directions. She reached out with her power and confirmed what her instincts were screaming. This was a coordinated attack. At least 20 wolves moving into position with weapons and magic, designed to breach even the estate's considerable defenses. She triggered the estate alarm system with a pulse of lightning and immediately connected mentally to Kale through their bond. He was in a council meeting across the city, but she felt his immediate response, felt him mobilizing his forces even as he demanded through their link that she get to the secure bunker beneath the residence. Ilara ignored the command and instead ran for the roof, knowing that her best chance of defending against multiple attackers was to take the high ground and use her abilities at maximum range. The attackers breached the outer walls just as she reached the rooftop. She could see them now, wolves in both forms spreading out to surround the main building, and her newly developed ability to read electrical signatures told her they were enhanced somehow, pumped full of magic or drugs that made them stronger and faster than normal. This wasn't a ragtag group of opportunists. This was a professional assault team sent by someone with resources and planning. Ilara raised her hands toward the sky and called the storm. Clouds gathered with unnatural speed, darkening the late afternoon sky until it looked like midnight. Lightning answered her summons, great bolts of it that she could feel waiting for direction like arrows in a quiver. She picked her first target, a wolf who had just blown through the reinforced front door, and sent a lightning strike directly through the center of his chest. He dropped instantly, either dead or unconscious. She couldn't tell and didn't particularly care. The other attackers scattered at the display, but they didn't retreat. Instead, they split into smaller groups, trying to come at the building from multiple angles to make it harder for her to target them all. Ilara adjusted her strategy, calling smaller but more numerous strikes, creating a web of lightning that made it dangerous to approach from any direction. She was dimly aware of royal guards engaging the attackers on the ground, but her focus was on keeping anyone from reaching the building itself. One of the attackers made it through her perimeter, a huge alpha wolf who seemed resistant to electrical attacks, his fur smoking but his momentum unslowed. Ilara dropped from the roof directly onto his back, letting electricity course through her body into his at point-blank range. This close, she could override the magical protections he was carrying, could send power directly into his nervous system until he collapsed, twitching. She rolled away from his fallen form and came up facing 3 more wolves who had used their packmate's assault as cover to get close. They were circling her with the coordination of experienced fighters, and Alara realized with cold certainty that they were specifically targeting her rather than just the estate in general. Someone wanted her dead or captured badly enough to send assassins this skilled. The first wolf lunged, and Alara met him with a blast of lightning that should have dropped him instantly. Instead, he shrugged it off and kept coming, and she had to resort to hand-to-hand combat techniques Vera had drilled into her. Duck under the swipe of his claws, knee to the gut, roll away from the follow-up bite. She was outmatched in terms of pure physical strength, and the other 2 were closing in to help their packmate. Just before they reached her, a massive silver wolf exploded into the way, courtyard moving with speed that blurred the edges of visibility. Kale's wolf form was every bit as impressive as his human one, all lethal grace and overwhelming power. He took down one attacker with a single bite to the throat and used the momentum to crash into the second, bearing them both to the ground in a snarling mass of fur and fangs. Alara used the distraction to finish off her own opponent, gathering enough electrical energy to bypass whatever protections he was carrying and sending it directly into his brain. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings, and she immediately turned to help Kyle, but he had already dispatched his 2 targets and was shifting back to human form without apparent concern for his nudity or the blood covering his skin. More royal guards were pouring into the courtyard now, securing the perimeter and checking the fallen attackers for signs of life. Kale strode directly to Alara and grabbed her shoulders, checking her for injuries with hands that shook, slightly despite his controlled expression. He demanded to know if she was hurt, and she assured him she was fine, that none of them had managed to land a serious blow. His relief was palpable, but quickly transformed into fury. He wanted to know why she hadn't gone to the bunker like he told her, why she had put herself in danger instead of letting his guards handle the threat. Alara stood her ground and pointed out that if she had hidden, the attackers would have torn through the estate looking for her, would have killed guards and servants, and possibly succeeded in their objective. By making herself visible and defending from high ground, she had drawn them into a killing field where she had every advantage. Kale looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find fault with her tactical assessment. Instead, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly enough that she had to remind him she needed to breathe. She felt him shaking with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. Felt through their bond just how terrified he had been when he sensed her in danger. She wrapped her arms around him in return and let him hold her, let him confirm through touch that she was real and whole and safe. The interrogation of the surviving attackers revealed what they had suspected. The assault had been ordered by a coalition of alphas who saw Alara's existence as a threat to the political order they benefited from. A Tempest Wolf allied with the Alpha King represented a concentration of power that could upset decades of carefully maintained balance. Better to eliminate her now, before she became fully trained and impossible to remove. The attempted assassination gave Kale the justification he needed to move against the conspirators openly. He called a gathering of all the major alphas under his rule, making it clear that attendance was mandatory and refusal would be considered an act of rebellion. The meeting was set for 2 weeks out, giving everyone time to travel but not enough. Time to mount effective resistance. Alara spent those 2 weeks in intensive preparation. This gathering would be her first major public appearance in supernatural high society, and it needed to establish her as someone to be respected and feared, rather than pitied or dismissed. Maya helped her select clothes that projected power without appearing to try too hard. Marcus coached her on the political dynamics between different factions, in which alphas were likely to cause trouble. Vera ran her through combat scenarios until defending herself became pure reflex. The night before the gathering, Kale found Alara alone in the training room, running through defensive patterns. He watched her for a few moments before announcing his presence, taking in the fluid confidence in her movements, the precise control she now had over her lightning abilities. She had transformed from the crying Omega in the storm to someone formidable in her own right, and his pride in her accomplishment was matched only by his fear of what tomorrow might bring. Alara sensed his presence and stopped mid-pattern, turning to face him with a question in her eyes. Kale asked if she was ready for what was coming, if she understood that tomorrow would likely determine whether she could live openly or would need to spend the rest of her life hiding from those who feared her power. She told him she was as ready as she could be, that she trusted the training he and his team had provided. They stood looking at each other across the training room, and Alara felt the mate bond pulling at her, urging her to close the distance between them. These past weeks she had been too focused on survival and training to give much thought to the personal aspects of their connection, but facing the uncertainty of tomorrow made her reconsider her caution. If things went badly at the gathering, if she didn't survive the political machinations that awaited, she didn't want to die having never explored what this bond might mean. She crossed the room in quick strides and kissed him before fear or overthinking could stop her. Kyle went perfectly still for half a heartbeat before kissing her back with an intensity that stole her breath, his hands coming up to cup her face like she was something infinitely precious. The electricity between them sparked and danced, creating a visible field of energy that illuminated the training room in flickering blue-white light. When they finally broke apart, Alara told him that she wasn't making any promises about forever, that she still needed time to figure out who she was, independent of trauma and survival. But she wanted him to know that what she felt for him was real, that the mate bond wasn't the only thing drawing her to him anymore. His kindness, his patience, his strength tempered with gentleness, these were things she valued independent of fate's design. Kale's response was to kiss her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a claim. He told her that, whatever time she was willing to give him, whatever pieces of herself she felt ready to share, he would treasure them as the gifts they were. The bond might have brought them together, but what they built from here would be their own choice, their own creation. The gathering took place in the Great Hall, a space designed to hold hundreds of wolves comfortably. Every major alpha and many minor ones had responded to Kyle's summons, filling the room with enough dominant energy to make the air itself feel heavy. Alara stood at Kale's side on the raised platform, wearing deep blue that brought out the silver lightning patterns that now flickered naturally across her skin when she felt strong emotion. Kale addressed the assembly with the kind of absolute authority that reminded everyone why he held his position. He spoke about the attack on his estate, about the attempted assassination of his mate, and about his discovery of the conspiracy behind both. He named names, called out specific alphas who had funded and planned the assault, and watched them try to deny their involvement in the face of evidence his intelligence network had gathered. Then he turned the floor over to Alara, letting her speak for herself for the first time. She talked about her childhood, about being suppressed and abused, because her family feared what she might become. She described the night in the storm when her power awakened, the weeks of training that followed, and the attempted assassination that proved some wolves would rather kill than adapt to change. She explained that she wasn't seeking power or political influence. She simply wanted the right to exist without persecution, to develop her abilities without fear of elimination. Her words resonated with more than just their literal meaning. Through her connection to electrical impulses, she was broadcasting sincerity and truth on a level that bypassed conscious defenses. Every wolf in that room could feel that she meant what she said, could sense the genuine nature of her intentions. It was a display of Tempest abilities that none of them had seen in living memory, and it had exactly the effect Kyle had hoped for. One by one, the alphas acknowledged her right to exist and train under royal protection. Some did so grudgingly, others with genuine respect, but all of them understood that opposing her meant opposing Kale, and that was a fight most weren't prepared to commit to. The conspirators who had funded the assassination were given a choice: submit to judgment and make reparations or face immediate challenge to their territories. All chose submission over the certainty of defeat. By the time the gathering ended, Alara's position was secure in ways that went beyond simple political maneuvering. She had proven herself capable and restrained, powerful, but not power-hungry, exactly the kind of person who could be worked with rather than against. More importantly, she had shown that Tempest abilities were real and formidable, rewriting assumptions about what was possible in their world. The aftermath was exhausting, but satisfying. Treaties were renegotiated, Alliances reformed, power structures adjusted to account for the new reality of a Tempest heir in active practice of her gifts. Alara found herself drawn into the political process not as decoration, but as a valuable participant, her ability to sense deception making her invaluable during sensitive negotiations. Her relationship with Kyle deepened gradually, built on shared work and mutual respect, rather than rushed by the urgency of the mate bond. They took their time exploring what they meant to each other, learning how to balance their public roles with private connection. Some nights they would simply sit together in comfortable silence. Other times they would argue passionately about policy or strategy, and slowly they built something real beneath the supernatural connection fate had handed them. 6 months after the gathering, Alara stood in the same training room where everything had begun, watching storm clouds roll across the sky through the reinforced windows. She could feel every electrical charge in those clouds, could call lightning with a thought, could read the intentions of anyone who entered her range. The frightened Omega, who had run crying into a storm, felt like someone from another lifetime, a ghost of who she had been before she understood her own strength. Kyle found her there and wrapped, his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder while they watched the approaching storm together. He asked if she ever regretted leaving Silverpine, if she ever missed the simplicity of her old life. Alara thought about it seriously before answering. She told him she didn't miss the pain or the oppression, didn't miss believing herself worthless or broken, but she was grateful for the journey because it had led her here, to a life with purpose and meaning, to power used in service of justice rather than domination. She turned in his arms and kissed him softly, feeling the now familiar spark of electricity that danced between them. The lightning obeyed her now, answered to her call, bent to her will. But more importantly, she obeyed herself, answered her own needs, shaped her own destiny. That was the real power she had gained. Not control over storms, but control over her own story. The future was uncertain and probably dangerous. There would always be those who feared her abilities or resented her position. But she had Kale at her side, had allies who respected her, had skills she had earned through hard work and dedication. The Omega who had been found crying in the storm had become the lightning itself, beautiful and fierce, and impossible to ignore. If you enjoyed this story of transformation and empowerment, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more supernatural romance content. Drop a comment below telling us what you loved about Alara's journey from rejection to acceptance. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss our next emotionally charged tale of finding strength in unexpected places.